In terms of pricing of an innovation in the marketplace, initially I'm speaking about pre-marketing, pre-revenue companies. So how do you price your innovation in the context of probably a financing? So how much value, how much worth is your valuation when you raise a certain amount of money? And there is no fixed model or plan for this. Of course, if you were a company that is based on sales and revenue, then of course you can make discounted cash flow calculations, and then you can extrapolate into the future based on the numbers that you have currently. But without the numbers, of course, it's a little bit arbitrary, and it's really more evaluation of the concept, the people, the team that creates the value of your corporation when you talk to your stakeholders, your customers, which are the investors and potentially later a pharma company. There are no concrete metrics, at least according to my experience, in an earlier stage biotech company that is pre-revenue and pre-marketing. Nevertheless, pricing is important to consider very early on, because at the end of the day, somebody has to pay for your innovation. Let's say you are developing something that is fantastic, but astronomically expensive, so that nobody will be able to reimburse that, or the health insurance system would simply not be able to cover the cost of the 10 million therapy. I think there's no commercial value proposition. So you have to actually also, as a company in early development, think about, well, what is the economical use of your innovation in terms of treatment of a particular disease? I mean, does it shorten the treatment cost? Is it cheaper than the current therapy, or is it better? Because if there's a treatment out there that, I mean, is not curative, and the patients have to go on with other therapies which are expensive as well, I mean, your benefit could simply be that you have a better efficacy, and therefore you cut the patient's cost or the healthcare cost by simply the patients are being cured and they don't need medication any longer. And this is what investors will very much look upon in your project at the beginning as well, because let's say this pricing issue, or kind of the reimbursement model that has to make sense economically, is something that has to make sense for pharma companies, which are the companies that potentially in-license your innovation. But it also has to make sense for the investors who finance you, because they know the pharma companies will make these calculations. At the end, if it's not economically viable, what you're developing, then it's very unlikely that you will get financing for this, or that when you get financing, that this will lead to something meaningful in return of investment. There has to be an advantage. Otherwise, it's not economically viable and will not be attractive for investors or pharma companies. So at NBE, we had the concrete vision at the beginning that the enzymatic conjugation technology with the payload that we have developed would provide better drugs with an improved safety and an increased efficacy of the drugs. So essentially, the therapeutic window would be better in comparison to the currently available antibody-drug conjugates. And then potentially with a curative potential, because we had an immuno-oncology function that we could demonstrate academically in non-clinical experiments, so that we could actually not only destroy the tumor, but also activate the immune system against the tumor, which would essentially mean we would have drugs that could potentially cure patients and not only prolong their life. And this is an economically interesting value proposition, because, well, we would develop drugs that are better, that shorten the treatment of the patients, potentially at the same price of current drugs of the same modality. But if you have a better therapeutic window, you have a higher therapeutic effect, and therefore you reduce the health insurance costs, and you would push other inferior drugs out of the system. So yeah, there's an economic benefit, of course, if you have the best drug. Well, what pharma companies consider as best in class, right? So we had the clear aspiration that we develop best-in-class products. And pharma companies not only like best-in-class, they also like first-in-class. So if you hit both of this, first-in-class and best-in-class, and you can prove that this is actually the case, then you're in a comfortable position. Oh, that was very difficult. This is also very difficult for startup companies to really put concrete numbers about the economical benefit of, let's say, an improved drug or an improved drug modality in a global market environment with the current competition that is out there, but also considering maybe the future competition that is also still under development. I mean, there are, of course, consulting companies out there who screen the markets very diligently. So for small companies, you usually don't have a marketing expert on board, but this is something that you can insource or that you can find with service companies. Ideally, one has to make these calculations, but I think for a startup company, it's accepted if you, by rule of thumb, essentially estimate what would be the economical benefit for a patient, for a company to adopt your product opportunity. If you say we are at least 20% more efficient or cheaper, then this might already be sufficient as a value proposition. Calculating the actual value of a company based on a discounted cash flow model, of course, you can do even pre-revenue by if you believe the numbers in the business plan, when the company has the break even and becomes profitable, and you see kind of revenues and earnings. And so if you see that calculation, of course, you can make the calculation. But the biggest problem there is, are the assumptions correct? And I think there's a 99% probability in an early startup company that still has 3, 4, 5 years to go until they become cash flow positive to, gauge whether the assumptions for kind of the business plan and the financial modeling is correct. In most cases, it's not correct. I mean, the development is slower or it's not taking place, or there were other wrong assumptions. And then, of course, I mean, all of your DCF calculations are essentially as wrong as your assumptions. I think for startup companies, it's easier to kind of make some ballpark calculations and, as I mentioned before, provide some rule of thumb numbers saying, well, we are 20, 25% cheaper, better, whatever, which then makes economically sense. And whether it's in the end 10% or 30% really, changes, of course. 10% can make a big difference. But in the larger context, I mean, people just want to know, well, is there value proposition or not? And DCF models can be horribly wrong in this respect, because in the early days, you have to make bold assumptions that cannot be verified. I think this is something that you have to work very hard on for many, many years to then create the data sets that support and to build a company in order to justify a high value that you can achieve either in an initial public offering or in a trade sale scenario. You have to have, an innovation that really creates value, a significant value for the system, having the team that can take this further, being able to leverage this in a commercial setting and not only academically, having clinical validation of your data. All of this then in aggregate adds to bring the value to this magical threshold that you mentioned, which defines a unicorn company. But it's, of course, not only kind of the amount of money that someone is spending for the company. Of course, it's also about the product that eventually reaches the market and then, captures a certain market share and creates a dominance in the market, which I would then consider a definition of a unicorn company, that really the solution has had a big impact in society or in the market. And this is can only be figured out once the product or the innovation is taken through the late stages of product development, marketing, including marketing, and then showing that this actually works for a patient population or for the society, for all people in a certain indication.